It is a great pleasure to introduce our speakers today. I've known Don Davidson for over 40 years. We used to share a driveway, and it was a pretty fabulous driveway with the cars that he used to drive up and down the driveway. He's going to show you today a small Stanley steamer. Well, you should have seen the one that he had when we shared the driveway. It was the Cadillac of Stanleys. They've got a picture of it that you can see after the talk. And we've got about 15 kids riding in this car. So it is with great pleasure that I would like to introduce now Don's wife, Sarah, as the speaker, and Don Davidson as the mechanic in rebuilding the cars. Sarah, would you please?
Thank you so much, Jim Stanley, for inviting us here today. I'm delighted to be here with you to share a history of the inventors of the Stanley Steam Car. My name is Sarah Stanley. My husband, Don Davidson, and I live in Chatham. We have a small antique car collection, including 3 steam cars, an 1899 Locomobile Steam Carriage that you'll see later today, a 1910 Stanley touring car, and a 1913 Stanley Roadster. I'm very proud to share that Stanley Steam Cars were invented and manufactured by my great-grandfather, Francis Edgar Stanley, and his twin, my great-granduncle, Freelan Stanley. So why are we talking about the inventors of a steam car which became obsolete nearly 100 years ago? Firstly, it's not widely known the impact they played at the dawn of the automotive development in the United States. Additionally, by looking at their accomplishments, we're given another glimpse into one of the many inspiring stories of the early industrialization of America at the turn of the 20th century. In the next 25 minutes, I'll share a history of the Stanley Steam Car and the 2 remarkable men who invented and developed the car. I'll share a Stanley connection to Chatham, which began in 1865. Lastly, I'll play an 8-minute video of Don discussing and driving our 1899 Locomobile Steam Carriage. To begin, the inventors of the Stanley Steam Car were Francis Edgar Stanley and Freelan Stanley, identical twins. While the Stanley Steam Car is how the inventors are best known, they were quite successful and rather prolific in numerous areas. So I will begin to give you a broader overview of their lives. Francis Edgar and Freelan Oscar, who today are referred to as FE and FO, were inventors, manufacturers, businessmen, teachers, artists, musicians, violin makers, infrastructure and community developers, architectural engineers, men of Yankee ingenuity. They were born in Kingfield, Maine, June 1st, 1849. They were the 2nd and 3rd children born to Solomon and Althea Stanley. Solomon was a farmer and teacher and occupied positions of trust in his hometown of Kingfield, as well as in the county and state. FE and FO were brought up on a farm in the rural village of Kingfield, Maine. They were known as the Stanley twins. They were industrious, resourceful, and exceptionally fine students. Their talent for acquiring knowledge far outrunning the limits of the common schools of their vicinity. They both attended the Farmington Western State Normal School, today's Farmington branch of the University of Maine. Both Francis and Freelan became teachers when still young, but they were ever the students. After several years of teaching, both FE and FO realized the profession was a challenging way to support a family and ventured into business. FE had an unusual talent for portraiture and turned to this to start a business. The demand for his freehand drawings, which he was making in ever-increasing numbers, attracted him to search for a larger community when he moved south to Lewiston, Maine. With his growing success and natural inclination to improve his product and business, he constructed an improvement of the atomizer, what we now call the airbrush. This amendment became the first in a long line of patents FE and FO would submit throughout their lifetimes. Their first patent, improvement of atomizers, was issued September 1876. FE's portraits became renowned and in great demand by many prominent Maine families of the day. He won first prize in a Portland, Maine competition, was sent to the 1876 American Centennial Celebration in Philadelphia, where he was awarded the grand prize in all classes of crayon portraiture, as it was then called. Ever the innovator, FE recognized that he could be more productive if he reduced the sitting time of his subjects by capturing their image photographically. The emerging photographic technology of the day was the dry plate negative, replacing the cumbersome and time-intensive wet plate. This dry plate method, while known for some time, had not been widely used. This product is a sheet of glass coated on one side with a light, sensitive emulsion. FE, preferring the dry plate technique, began to tinker with his own emulsion for the plates, and before too long, he had developed both a new formula and a new method of manufacture in his Lewiston, Maine location. He began to produce this product for sale and attracted the attention from numerous large supply houses in the United States and Canada. Orders grew so large that in 1884, he asked Freelan. Previous to this improvement, the time it took to produce glass slides was 60 plates per hour. The twins' improvement of the emulsion and automated machinery increased productivity to 60 plates per minute, and the quality was superior. The twins then filed for and received their dry plate coating machine patent in July of 1886. The twins developed an extensive distribution system throughout the United States and Canada. They built a second factory in Montreal. They continued business in Lewiston, Maine for several years, building a large factory there, and then leaving Maine for Newton, Mass, only when it became evident that the growth of the business required an establishment of a plant nearer the market. They built a factory in Watertown, Massachusetts, on the Charles River, 7 miles from downtown Boston. The twins and their wives resided in Newton, Mass. By the turn of the century, the Stanley dry plate became known throughout the world and was grossing nearly $1 million annually. After years of prosperity as manufacturers of the Stanley dry plate, in January 1904, they sold their patents to George Eastman of the Eastman Kodak Company in Rochester, New York. The dry plate business will be the key funder of 2 large efforts to come. The first effort funded by the Stanley dry plate financial success was the development of the Stanley Steam Car. I'd like to begin by setting the scene of automotive activity at the turn of the 20th century. Around the year 1900, the automobile started to be taken seriously in America, and several companies began producing cars for the general public. The automobile industry was in its infancy and the available technology limited. Nonetheless, there were 3 candidates being considered as a power source. First, the internal combustion engine, powered by the explosive liquid gasoline. This technology was only about 15 years old and was still in the early ages of development. Second, the electric motor, powered by storage batteries. This was championed by Thomas Edison, who envisioned the electric automobile as a great future for his newly developed storage battery. But again, this technology was in its infancy and had severe drawbacks, such as slow speed and a range of approximately 60 miles before batteries needed recharging. The third, steam power. At this time, this made more sense than the others, as it had successfully powered locomotives for over 60 years, was well known and extremely reliable. During this time, all three automotive technologies were manufactured and sold, each with its own degree of success. As we all know, the final winner was the internal combustion engine, which was used in nearly every automobile produced in the last 122 years, excluding our more recent surge of electric car development. However, if you'd been alive at the turn of the last century, you probably would have guessed steam would be triumphant. And for the first decade, it was. Boston was a hotbed of automobile experimentation. F.E., a man of restless energy, was intent on improving common things. He became interested in the application of steam to the moving of a vehicle on the roads. The first car F.E. built utilized the transportation technology of the day: the horse carriage and the bicycle. It resembles a common wagon with wood socket, wire wheels, pneumatic tires, and was steered by a curved handle or tiller steer and utilized a chain, much like a bicycle. Then F.E. added a steam engine and associated technology. From the first, there was no question of its power or speed. F.E. built his first steam car automobile in 1897 for his own use. He then built a second for his twin. In November 1898, at the urge of the promoters of the first automobile show in Boston, the twins made a guest appearance at the speed hill and hill climbing demonstration trials. This was held at the Charles River Park Velodrome in Cambridge. The crowd went wild with their wins in both categories. Their car was so well received that within weeks, they started producing them for the general public after taking orders for almost 200 cars. These cars were arguably the first production automobile in the United States, and 3 years before Henry Ford started production. However, having just retired from the dry plate business, it was not their plan to go into automotive manufacturing. And the following spring of 1899, they couldn't refuse a generous offer to sell their nascent automotive manufacturing and patents to what became the Locomobile Company, for which the Stanleys would serve as promoters and advisors for 1 year. Fulfillment of that contract included F.O.'s dramatic ascent in the car to the top of Mount Washington in northern New Hampshire, with his wife Flora at his side, making it the first car up the highest mountain of the eastern United States. This famous and very challenging carriage road was not for the faint of heart. Even today, on a paved road in a modern car is a test of one's nerves. F.O. also gave President McKinley a ride in the steam car for the first time an American president had ridden in an automobile. These events were to demonstrate the viability of this new and budding automotive technology. 2 years later, having fulfilled the contractual obligation in 1901, the twins returned to Stanley Steam Car manufacturing. F.E. built a large factory to manufacture his new and improved vehicles at his Newton, Mass location. The twins modified the type of the motor carriage continually, adding automatic devices of their own invention, designing new models each year, and thus blazing the way in the development of the Stanley Motor Carriage Company. The company produced steam cars up through 1925, making it the longest running manufacturer of steam vehicles in America. The Stanley brothers never adopted the mass production techniques developed by Henry Ford to manufacture his famous Model T. They assembled each car by hand, and in their most successful year produced 700 vehicles. It has been estimated that over the life of the company, they produced just under 11,000 cars. Today, there are approximately 600 cars still in existence. There is a group of devoted people in the United States, Canada, Western Europe, Scandinavia, South Africa, and Australia still maintaining and running these wonderful cars. I'd like to share 5 models with you here. What you see on the left is an original photo in the day, and on the right is a current car being maintained by these wonderful individuals. On the top left is the speedy and powerful Vanderbilt racer that's taken in Newton. Effie is standing aside the car. Fred Marriott, a famous car racer in the day, is sitting in the seat. Wonderful car. The one to the right is a beautiful Vanderbilt racer being maintained in Pennsylvania. Down below is one of the earlier cars, a runabout. Effie is sitting in that, again, in Newton. And that car to the right lives in Vermont. Up above, to the left, is, if you will, a bus of the day. It had as few as 3 bench seats, as many as 5. This vehicle was developed for the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, something I'll be talking about shortly. To the right is a beautiful, beautifully maintained mountain wagon that lives in Delaware. Down below that is the Gentleman Speedy Roadster. Gentleman Speedy Roadster, a very sporty car. It would have been the muscle car or Corvette of the day. It's very popular, as all these cars are from these steam car owners. This particular car to the right lives in Massachusetts. The Stanleys also made commercial vehicles, delivery vehicles. This is a personal favorite of mine. It is the Moxie delivery truck. And if you know Maine, Maine has a soda called Moxie. You either hate or love this drink. And there is only one that we all know of, and it is the one to the right that lives in Michigan. And it's just a fabulous, fabulous design. And we are always hopeful and on the look for barn fresh Stanleys. This is a car that we met in Florida, and we're still finding them happily, often in parts, not often as put together as this. To continue. The Stanley Steam Car made racing history at Ormond Beach, Florida in 1906. Effie designed a Stanley racer with a canoe-shaped body. Racing was in its infancy, and there were questions concerning the effect high speeds might have on the human body and what it could endure. At the time, some believed that no human could survive traveling over 100 miles per hour. So these drivers were both courageous as well as competitive. On January 26th of 1906, Effie's racer, driven by Fred Marriott, achieved a world land speed record of over 127 miles per hour. This record held for 4 years. Never again has a record been held so long. In June 1917, the twins retired and transferred the control and management of the Stanley Motor Carriage Company, selling their interest in the corporation to Effie's 2 sons-in-law. Effie retained a minor interest in the company, allowing him to turn his attention to mass transit. This endeavor he called the unit car. This single steam-powered rail car would run passengers or freight on interurban railroads. The intent was to take the place of the interurban trolley car, and one of these cars had been running successfully on a New England railroad. July of 1918, Effie, on his way to a conference with the engineer of that company, died in a car accident while avoiding a horse-drawn hay wagon. He was 68 years old. Following Effie's death, all work on the unit car ended. The Stanley Motor Carriage Company, under the direction of his sons-in-law, continued production for 8 more years until 1925. It was the end of an era. During the early years of steam car development, the brothers were split up due to health issues experienced by FO. This brings us to a second effort funded by the Stanley Dry Plate and has us focus on FO. In early March of 2003, FO was struck with a severe reoccurrence of tuberculosis. His mother and 2 brothers had previously died of the disease, so clearly the Stanleys had a predisposition for pulmonary problems. At 105 pounds, FO and his wife Flora were ushered to the high and dry altitudes of Denver, Colorado for an undetermined but prolonged stay under a doctor's care. His prognosis was grave, and should he survive the winter, FO's doctor recommended moving into the Colorado mountains when summer arrived. FO was determined not to surrender to his illness and just as determined to like his new home. By the end of March, FO began to gain strength and weight, and by late June, he and his wife Flora ventured to the mountain community of Estes Park. FO and Flora fell in love with Estes Park that summer, and in the lovely arid climate, FO continued to regain his health. He did not return to New England for 4 years, and in that time, he began a series of projects which would change Estes Park forever. Being a successful entrepreneur, FO saw an opportunity to build an elegant resort hotel in Estes Park. To build this hotel, FO would also need to create the town's infrastructure. Roads from the railheads at Lyons and Loveland, as referenced earlier in this presentation. These are 4 mountain wagons developed specifically to carry visitors from the trains to the Stanley Hotel. FO also developed a hydroelectric power plant. An Estes Park Water Company, Estes Park's first bank, first health clinic, first sewer, all of which he did. And in 1905, FO purchased 1,400 acres in Estes Park. In 1906, he completed designs of the Stanley Hotel. It took 2 years to build and construct, and the doors opened 1909. It's a beautifully situated Georgian colonial revival with spacious rooms and lovely interior. It was on par with the finest resort hotels of the time and one of the only fully electrified hotels in the country. In a time when most people did not have electricity, the Stanley Hotel used this new technology for lighting, for cooking and laundry in the western wilderness of Colorado. The Stanley Hotel is still in operation and it's a wonderful visit. So, how does all of this connect to the history of Chatham, New Jersey? I will give a brief history here. Shortly after I moved to Chatham in 1996, Don and I heard rumors that there could be a connection between the Stanleys of Kingfield, Maine and Chatham, New Jersey. With curiosity, we had observed Chatham's Stanley Park next to the Passaic River on River Road, as well as Stanley Avenue adjacent to the park, and the Stanley Congregational Church on Fairmount. Later still, we became more curious when the town published a pictorial history of Chatham Township. And one of the first pictures in the book was an old photograph of a prominent Chatham citizen perched in a 1903 Stanley Steam Car. That would be a runabout you're looking at. With the existence of the Chatham and Summit Historical Societies, we began a deeper dive and discovered a fascinating connection between the Stanley family and a former resident of Chatham, George Shepherd Page. It is his son, Albion Page, who is sitting in the runabout in this photo. The connection is this: F.E. and F.O.'s father had a sister, Margaret, who married Samuel Page of Winthrop, Maine. Following a similar entrepreneurial path as F.E. and F.O., in 1845, Samuel and Margaret moved to Boston as their business of distilling chemicals and manufacturing paraffin varnish began to expand. They had 7 children, including a son, George Shepherd Page, a first cousin of F.E. and F.O., who would eventually come to be a resident of Chatham, New Jersey. In 1858, George joined his father in business and expanded it further into the development of pitch, developed from crude tar. In 1862, George and his wife moved to New York City. George formed the firm of Page, Kidder, and Fletcher, an early coal tar distiller, producing pitch for roofing felt and creosote oil for preserving wood. This firm evolved into a stock company titled New York Coal Tar Chemical Company. A footnote here, in 1920, this company will merge with Allied Chemical and ultimately Honeywell. After living 5 years in New York, He had a desire for a rural and healthy environment for his family. The Chatham connection begins when George Page and family moved to Chatham. George, a wealthy man by now, purchased several hundred acres in Chatham, including land along the Passaic River, formerly occupied by the Bunnell family mills. George quickly set up the family Stanley Felt Mill on the Passaic River for production of tar and roof felting paper. It is clearly marked as the Stanley Felt Mill on the 1867 map of Chatham. An additional coal byproduct was developed at the mill for its disinfectant qualities in homes to hasten recovery from serious respiratory illnesses. And in 1879, the Vapopresylene Company was founded. This product was manufactured until the 1950s. Over time, all traces of the factory and the dam that powered the mill have been removed, and it's been replaced by the green lawns at Stanley Park along the Passaic River. Close by, the Stanley Avenue still exists with the modest homes that were built for the workers. At one time, Page employed more than 10% of Chatham residents. George built a substantial Victorian home for his growing family that he named Hillside on Chatham's current Hillside Avenue, just above the river and near his mill. In 1867, George also founded the outdoor Hillside Mission Sabbath School. In 1871, George funded and built a structure to house the first Chatham public school, which he named Stanley Hall. This was the forerunner to the Chatham public school system. In 1873, the Stanley Congregational Church was founded with George as charter member and deacon. In 1889, Page formed the Chatham Fish and Game Protective Association. Sadly, this lovely structure burned down. However, Chatham Fish and Game still exists today at the same location on Fairmount Avenue, and George's portrait still hangs in the hall. In 1911, George Page's house and property were purchased by the Avid family of Chatham. They tore down Page's Victorian house and built their mansion in the same location. If you know Chatham, you may be familiar with this house. It sits on a tract of land above the river road and below Hillside, which is now being developed into high-end housing called Enclave at Chatham. I wondered why George Page named these numerous locations Stanley instead of his own family name of Page. And upon further research, I discovered it was because he so loved his mother, he wanted to honor her in this way. This has been a brief review of a larger local history of the Page family. Should you be interested, there is an in-depth lecture presentation available through the Chatham Township Historical Society. And it's also been a pleasure to share with you some of F.E. and F.O. Stanley's accomplishments and history with you today. I'd like to share that there is a Stanley Museum in Kingfield, Maine, that keeps and shares the larger Stanley family story. I'd like to end this presentation by playing an 8-minute video that we have on YouTube of my husband Don discussing and driving the 1899 Locomobile Steam Carriage. Following that, we'd be happy to take any questions.
Hi everybody, we're here today to look at my 1899 Locomobile, see it in action, and learn a little bit of how it operates. The vehicle in front of you, as I said, is an 1899 Locomobile. It was made in the Stanley Motor Carriage Company in Newton, Massachusetts. It was designed by the Stanley brothers and built by the Locomobile Company. It's arguably the oldest production vehicle in America that's still running. This was the first production run of vehicles. There were 200 made. This is number 221. It's a steam-powered vehicle, which means that it has a boiler, which is under the seat. And if you can pull in there, you take a look at the boiler. It's the cylindrical object that is encased with insulation. And of course there's water inside that, and when the water is heated up, it turns to steam. Underneath the boiler is a burner, which actually heats up the water, and that's run on gasoline, and we run at pressures of 160 to 200 pounds per square inch. Once the water is turned into steam, it is directed into the engine, which is under the front seat as well. And as you can see, there's two cylinders, just like on a locomotive. And there's no transmission. There's no gears to shift. You turn on the steam and the engine goes. To reverse it, there's a lever which you throw, which reverses the timing on the valves 180 degrees. So instead of the steam coming into the top of the piston, it comes into the bottom of the piston. Engine goes in reverse and the car goes in reverse. So I'll open up. I've got the rear wheels jacked up, so we're not going to be taking off, otherwise we would. But I'm going to open the throttle a little bit, which is this lever right here. And you can see the engine in action. The engine is connected to the rear axle by a chain, almost like a bicycle chain. Now I'm going to put it into reverse. So besides controlling the steam to the engine, which is your speed, forward or reverse, the only other controls is the steering, which is done with a tiller. And as you push this to the right or the left, almost like you have on a boat, you can see the front wheels will turn to the right or the left. Besides the tiller and the steam control, the only other control is the brake. So you've got the steam throttle open to get you going forward. This stops you. The second lever over here puts you in reverse, changes the timing of the valves. As you can see, we're ready to go. We're down to 80 pounds, so I'm going to get up a little more steam before we head out. But as you can see, the steam gauge goes from 0 up to about 240 psi. We'll be running about 160 to 200 pounds per square inch today. So I'm going to now take it off the chock and get up a little more steam, and then we'll take it on the road. Well, here we are again. As you can see, we did make it on the road. An interesting thing about steam power is that as soon as I open this throttle, the steam pressure is at the pistons and you have all the power that the engine can deliver. So steam cars have a lot of acceleration and capable of high speeds. Now in this case, I'm only going to drive this about 15 miles an hour because I don't feel comfortable driving it any more than that. But the acceleration, again, for a car that's 118 years old, it's really remarkable. as you can see, we did make it home safely. We went out on a trip probably about 15 miles or so. Took us about an hour and a half, and now we're back home. And there's one last ritual that I like to share with you when you own a steam car, and that is blowing down the boiler. You do this at the end of the day, and what it does is takes all the steam out of the boiler under pressure, and it blows out any kind of scales or impurities that might have been deposited in the boiler as you went along. So I'll now open up the valves and show you what a blowdown looks like.
This is the stern.
We have, this is about 200 pounds of steam.
Oh, perfect. All right. Are there any questions? And Don, you might want to come up. We sort of, yes.
Repeat the question.
Oh, can I explain the relationship between the Stanley and the Locomobile? Was that the question? Yes. As was shared in the presentation, and Don will go into greater detail, but the Stanleys, while it was not their intention to go into car manufacturing, began at great request from that hill climb that they went to and aroused such interest and attention, they began to build 200 cars. But they were approached by two men to develop, to buy their nascent automotive business, and were given a lovely price, and they said yes. So the relationship literally is a sell. The two names of the individuals, I don't know if you want that level of detail, but that was the beginning of Locomobile, and another company too. The greater detail is a further detail, but that's the relationship. FE and FO did choose to say yes to a generous offer made to their initial 200 cars that they built, but had yet sold. Does that answer your question? Perfect.
Don, why don't you step up here and say hello to everybody?
The man who keeps everything going.
The mechanic that keeps everything going.
Yeah. Have to be. So the question is, they sold the patent to Locomobile. How is it that they could continue on in producing? Don will answer that.
They sold the patent, so it's a very
Gotta go close.
it's a very primitive car at this point. They sold the patents. Locomobile took off, continued making the cars that they designed, the Stanleys design, and the Stanleys, I think Sarah said, were to be part of that company for the first 2 years, and they took that time to reconfigure their designs, learn from Locomobile's mistakes, and by 1903 they came up with a completely different design with new patents which completely outdated the originals. So Locomobile
Good question.
only produced steam cars up through 1904. Then they gave up on that and went into gasoline cars very successfully. It was a very luxurious gasoline car up through the 20s, I believe.
Right.
Locomobile or Stanley? Locomobile, I would say, don't know the number, specific number, but they were several thousand per year up through 1904. So they were pretty prolific. So there were, whatever, 20,000 or something made, I would guess.
And many being run today.
Okay, so let's take a question from Thad Gabara online.
Good, thanks. That was a wonderful talk. I really enjoyed the history of how these two, your two grandfathers developed the companies and made everything work. It was really fantastic. But I have a question for you on maybe if you know of a copyright concern concerning the Stanley steamer, and has it ever been mentioned in the family? What are they doing with our name to clean carpets?
Very good question. And I know everybody heard that, so I don't need to repeat it. If you note, Stanley Steamer, the carpet cleaner, is spelled T-E-E. They, pardon me? Yes, the steamer part of it is E-E, not E-A. They professionally call the Stanley Museum or the business at the time regarding that copyright and acknowledged the difference in their name. So they are not infringing on the Stanley Steamer copyright because they spell their name differently. Does that answer your question?
Yes. And how did, I guess your grandfathers didn't take kindly to that name, or were they still around?
Oh, no, they were long gone. Stanley Steamer's modern. That's right. No, Stanley Steamers, they were born in 1849. Stanley Steamer carpet cleaner was not near.
Oh, okay.
Beginning.
And my last question.
And Don would like to add something.
Yeah, the term Stanley Steamer was a local generic type of nickname given the car. The Stanley brothers never referred to their car as a Stanley Steamer. It was always the Stanley Motor Carriage. So they didn't use that name whatsoever. The company never used that name. Another note too, the Stanley Steamer cleaner people did try to contact the museum. The museum gave them the names and addresses and phone numbers of the family members that still existed, because they wanted to follow through and just make sure there wouldn't be any issue. And quite honestly, we didn't care. So, but they changed it to EE, just
Courtesy.
Well, I'm sure it's just kind of a legal technicality just to make sure that they would not be liable.
And one last question. When you take your car to inspection, what did they do?
If you know, we have QQ plates. Are you familiar with QQ plates? Any vehicle that begins with QQ is an antique car, does not require, thankfully, does not require inspection. Does that answer your question? Don?
I'll add to that as well. Back in the day, my first antique cars that I got into, one was a Model T. This was about late 1960s, and I didn't want to be I didn't want to have antique car plates. I wanted to be able to drive this anywhere that I wanted to, other than at meets. So this is a day when you had to get your car inspected every year, and you drove it down to the inspection station, and you got out of the car and they stepped in and they tested the brakes. Well, if you know anything about Model Ts, which you probably may or may not, there's no gear shift lever. There's 3 pedals on the floor. And one is a brake, the other is the shifting between high and neutral and low, and the other is reverse. And the guy that got in to test the brakes, he sat in the car, he looked at the pedals, and he said, "You drive it."
We'll take a question here.
Could you describe the gasoline device that needed the steam?
Shall I begin with that?
Sure.
Okay. Some people say, do you,
Repeat the question.
oh, I beg your pardon. What is the fuel system for Stanley steamers? And how does it work? Just to begin, it's always liquid fuel and as carbon-free as possible. A Locomobile today, for instance, uses white gas, Pullman fuel. Our 1913 Roadster uses a mix of diesel and natural and gas. Some people use 100% gas, 100% diesel, and even kerosene. So liquid fuel is the answer. And Stanleys have both a pilot and a main fuel system. So you have fuel for both systems, excluding the car you'll see today. Our Locomobile, the small vehicles, it was one and the same. Coleman fuels both the pilot and the main burner. And that burner sits under the boiler. And that is the method, just like a camp wood stove, Coleman wood stove, very similar process, where you've got the burner underneath the boiler, and there you have it. Does that answer your question?
Great, thank you.
I'll add to that also. Usually it's the woman that puts her 2 cents in first. But I'll put my 2 cents in. Yeah, it's just like the old fashioned type of Coleman stoves. Coleman stoves, camp stoves today, you screw a bottle of propane onto the side of it and then you're good to go. The old stoves, which you can still get and use, and the lanterns use a liquid fuel, which is a white gas. It's like heptane or hexane. And you pump that under, and the Stanley work exactly the same way. You pump the fuel under pressure. The fuel then travels through a tube over the fire, and that fuel is then turned into a vapor. That vapor is fed down underneath the grate, the burner grate, mixed with air, and that mixture of air and gasoline comes up through the grate and then is burned with a very, very blue flame. It's a very efficient flame. The question was asked, how many miles to a gallon? Stanley gets about 10 miles to a gallon of fuel. But even more important, how many miles does it get to a gallon of water? And that's only about 1.
That's the issue.
So we have to continuously look for water. On the Locomobile, I have about a 20-mile capacity before I have to look for water. And if you didn't see it on the side of the car on the video, you'll see it at the picnic. I have a collapsible canvas bucket, which I can pull out of any water out of any stream. Later on, the Stanleys during the late teens put a condenser on the front of their car. It looked like a radiator. It looked like kind of a modern, for the day, modern gasoline car, but it was not a radiator. It was just the opposite. It was a condenser. And that would get the range up to maybe 25 miles or something like that.
We'll take our next question from Vito Gallo online.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, great. The fascinating program, and I'm just curious. The New York International Auto Show dates back to 1900. Was this vehicle under any corporate guise exhibited and promoted at the New York International Auto Show in the early 1900s?
Yes, it was, and it was presented under Locomobile.
Thank you.
Okay, over here.
Question, repeat it.
Yeah, the question was 2 questions. One was what is the speed of the steam car, top speed, and also where do I get parts? To answer your question, the Locomobile that you saw running in that video, I don't know how fast it can go. I do not have the courage to find out how fast the car will go. It's like it was described as if you were sitting on a card table in a rocking chair. Your center of gravity is like 4 feet off the ground. So I do not know how fast. I would guess at best with a full head of boiler, full head of steam, probably 25, 30 miles an hour. Question is, how long can you sustain that? How fast can you produce the steam? What was the second part of that? Oh, where do we get the parts from? We make them. Just as simple as that. There's no parts left. Well, every once in a while you'll find something, but it's usually not what you need. So I have a full machine shop in my barn at the back of my house that I can make anything I want.
Question in the back.
It's on the front. Question, repeat.
Yeah, the question was the Locomobile that I have, how much of it is original? The boiler is new. The burner is new. The rest of the car is pretty much as it was in 1899. There were some improvements that they made in like 1901, 1902, such as to the braking system. The original braking system on that Locomobile did not hold on a hill, so you'd roll backwards. This is the double acting system was installed in that car in like 1902 or something like that, and I'm not changing it either.
You might tell them the problem. Where it's from.
Yeah, Sarah just reminded me to tell the provenance of this car. I am the 3rd owner. It was originally owned by Adelaide Bunnell on East Jersey Street in Elizabeth, New Jersey. She owned the car through 1909. I have a copy of her original registration from 1903 for that car with the license plate number of 666. I have a copy of her driver's license from, I believe it's 1907. And she sold it to a collector in the late 1940s, a fellow by the name of Vito Fresolone. And he, from Springfield, New Jersey, he had a service station there. He restored it, got it running, and she sold it to him with one condition. And that was when he got it to run, that she was able to see it run. And got it running. This was told to me, got it running. And she came up in her chauffeur-driven car and he rode it around the parking. She didn't even get out of the car. She rolled down the window.
Oh.
He rode it around the parking lot and she was happy. And then I bought it from his estate in 1986. But I was aware of this car when I was 12 years old, 1956. I went to an antique car show, at one of my first, down in Point Pleasant, and this car was there. And I have a picture of myself as a 12-year-old boy standing next to this car. And when I bought it, I had no idea whether it was the same car until I compared the picture to the car, and it's definitely the same car.
Let me ask the obvious question is, how did your love of Stanley Steam Cars lead you to meeting this descendant of that family?
Stanley steamers are babe magnets. But the real story, people ask me, how did you meet your wife? And I tell them, well, it started back when I was 12 years old. Now, Sarah and I have been married now for 25 years. But we met on a steam car tour up in Kingfield, Maine, where the Stanley brothers were born. And I gave her a ride, and it's been a wild ride ever since.
Any other questions? I thought I saw more hands. There we go. Rich.
How much time do we have? The question was, what's the most frequent breakdown that happens on a steam car? It's hard. That's a very difficult. I've been driving steam for, over 40 years. I've owned one of the first ones, one of the last ones, and a couple in between, and I've driven it, 8,000 or 10,000 miles, and I've seen pretty much all of it. But I would say maintenance of the burner. What happens is that tube where the fuel gets heated inside, turning it to a vapor. If it heats it too much, it turns into like a charcoal and clogs up that tube. So you have to continuously manage the cleaning of that tube. And the other thing that you have to worry about is water, where you're going to find water.
Scorching boiler.
Oh, yes. And the other thing is, and this is the death of a steam car. If you run out of water, you have to be very careful. You run out of water, you ruin the boiler. So you're shot if you're on a tour.
I think it's very clear that if you're going to drive one of these around, you better bring a mechanic with you, like Don does. So a related question is, I wanted to ask, what about the safety of having a steam boiler under your seat?
Good question.
There's never the question. Oh, you read the question. Yes. There's never been an incident, a recorded incident of a Stanley steamer, quote unquote, blowing up or causing damage to somebody with the release of steam. There is a safety valve. Well, first of all, the steam gets, the burner gets turned off automatically when the pressure gets up to a certain level. So that's one control. There's also a blow off valve or pressure safety valve, which if the pressure gets up too high, that will go. But the main thing is the construction of the boiler itself is such that the weakest point are there's like 500 tubes in the boiler. It's a fire tube boiler. And these tubes are the weakest point of the boiler. So if it does go, if something ruptures, then it'll be the crushing of one of these tubes, which will release the steam very harmlessly. So there's never been a recorded incident of any of these things blowing up.
Well designed.
Very well designed. They've tried to blow them up. The Stanley brothers tried to blow it up. They couldn't do it.
That's it. Ken Lindhorst.
What's your firstborn worth?
What?
What is your-
Firstborn, yeah, it's their family.
Yeah,
Priceless.
if these things come up so, I couldn't tell you. These things come up so infrequently that there's really no stable price of, they're so rare.
Your best guess.
Depends on the car.
Yeah, it depends on the car, it depends on the condition.
Every car.
The later Stanleys are more valuable because they're further advanced technologically. And they bring more money. I mean, some Stanleys, the later Stanleys, more valuable Stanley, I've seen go up to close to $300,000. That's not what that car is worth. And the prices vary. And I'm talking prices that peaked maybe 15, 20 years ago. The prices now of Stanleys are way down, just like the stock market we were talking about before. So,
Hold on to it for a while.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, yes, Ron.
On a railroad steam engine, the engineer is worried about the angle, the angle that the engine is pointed because they may not, the water may cover some of the tubing and overheat the same power.
That's what you're talking about.
No. Well, the question is, with steam locomotives, you have to worry about the angle that the boiler is at, because if it's at a steep enough angle going up a hill or going down a hill, that it could expose parts of the boiler, which could overheat and explode. And the answer to that is that that's not true with a Stanley steamer. It's the same type of boiler, but the tubes are vertical as opposed to horizontal. So you're worried about the ends of the joint of the tubes in the head of the boiler being exposed. And because, again, this is a drum that is maybe 20 inches in diameter and maybe 20 inches tall. It's a vertical tube, so you're not gonna overheat one end of it.
What do you think, Steve? Keep
Why
going.
don't we take two more questions?
The question is there a presence internationally of these vehicles in auto shows internationally? There is a huge contention of steam buffs in England and Ireland. But these are sporadically, yes, there are cars all over the world. They get shown, I'm sure they get shown, but particularly in England, there's a crowd of enthusiasts and they come over here. I mean, I've met a lot of good friends of mine. So yes, it's an international, they sold them internationally. But even more to this day that
And Hershey's an international event.
yes, and at Hershey, Pennsylvania, which is an international event every October, I get to see my friends from all over the world.
Tom?
Yes, Jay has a bit of everything.
Repeat it.
Oh, yeah. The question is, does Jay Leno have a Stanley Steam car? He has several. Yes. Yeah, my brother-in-law sold him one of his Stanley Steam Cars. And yes, he's a Stanley owner and driver
How many
and a
cars-
massive
How many empty
enthusiast.
cars total does he own?
Don? Hundreds. Hundreds.
He can afford.
He can afford it.
But he is particularly fond of steam cars, and I've talked to him several times at Hershey because we meet as a steam car group. And in any case, he's a really down to earth type of guy. If you'd ever meet him, he's wears blue jeans and a t-shirt just like everybody else, and is more interested in the cars and how they perform and than he is with his own fame. Very, very interesting guy.
So with that,
Is that it?
And now let's ask Jim Shanley to come up and thank our wonderful speakers.
Oh.
You haven't lived until you've had a blowdown on your next door neighbor's property for the first time. Big cloud of steam. But Don, Sarah, really great presentation. I wish to thank you. And to, as a token of our appreciation, we have two certificates of appreciation.
Thank you.
Sarah,
Thank you so much.
Very nice, thank you.
And a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Don.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
Now I guess we can all go to the picnic.
Yeah.
No,
picnic
we have
time,
one
yeah.
salute to the old guard salute. Ask for the old guard
Oh,
salute.
oh, the old God salute.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Well done, well done.
Time to go.
Okay, thank you, Jim, and many thanks to Sarah and to Don. I can't figure out what was more fascinating, listening to the history of your granddad and great uncle, or the technology. Equally good. Equally good. Thank you.